Yeah. Okay. Good morning. Welcome back. Hope that your week is going well. So far, if you're a nerd like me, you stayed up late watching midterm election coverage. Either way, I hope that term is going well for you. Today is our last meeting of the week. We're not meeting this Friday because Friday is Labor Day. So our next class meeting after today will be the following Monday. So just keep that on your radar. We do still have a Canvas prompt that's due this Sunday, so I encourage you to continue to work on that. Because we have a long weekend, this is a really good time for you to really make some good progress on your recording and reflection essay. Remember that that is due on November 20th, so that's about a week and a half away. In fact, by the end of the long weekend, it would be a good idea for you to have completed that conversation and be in the process of transcribing and working through the draft of the essay, just to make sure that you're on a good track to complete that by the due date. The process of transcription and starting to apply the material is going to take a little bit, so I definitely encourage you to pace yourself as you're working through this. To that end, what I would like you to do is take some time on your own. I will not be asking you to turn this in for attendance, but I am going to ask you to share with the class as a whole. First of all, who are you planning to talk to for your conversation? If you know for sure like the date and time and you've received consent from that person, great. If not, you might start to narrow down and really make sure you've got a plan to have that conversation. Next, do you have any questions, concerns that you would like discussed in the class about this assignment? I got a really good question this morning about how to make the conversation not seem awkward, right? If you're meeting with that person, you might be a little bit worried that you're recording and doing it for a class and it might come across as unnatural. It can, from experience, seem that way at first, right? As you're recording and starting a conversation, it can seem a bit weird. But over time, it feels more and more natural as you get into a groove and get into a flow of normal conversation with that person. And one thing to remember is that you can pick about a 15-minute snippet from the conversation. So maybe you're talking for a while, and maybe the beginning of the conversation is a little bit awkward. That's okay. You don't have to include that part in your transcription or analysis. So you can pick a part of that conversation that you wanted to analyze. One other thing to think about too is that the way that we talk to each other and communicate changes, right? We might come in with an idea or agenda about what we want to talk about, but we could wind up with ourselves talking about something completely different. When I did this as a student, right, I went in thinking the conversation would go one way and it went another. So give yourself the space for your conversation to flow and evolve organically based on how you're talking with that person. That's what communication is. And then lastly, I would encourage you to develop a timeline for yourself where you start to work backwards from the due date and you think about what you need to accomplish in order to get that in on time, right? I'm a big fan of taking a deadline and working backwards from that deadline to say what you need to complete by a certain date. For instance, you might complete your conversation by the end of the week. You might choose to send me a rough draft by next Thursday or Friday, and then maybe you're completing a review and making some polishing and revisions. You don't have to send me a rough draft or outline, but if you do that, I can give you feedback. I can let you know what grade you should expect to receive, and I'll use inline comments. So take a little bit of time to work on this, and then I'll ask each of us to share who we're thinking about talking to for our conversation. Another minute here, and again, I will be asking everybody to share who they're thinking about talking to at this point. So let's go around and share who you're planning to talk to for your recorded conversation, or who you're thinking about talking with for that conversation. We'll start here on the side.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna do a friend at home, talk about the World Baseball Classic coming up. I'm thinking of planning on friend at home to FaceTime probably, and then talk about college football.
Two birds, one stone. Good way to do it. Great.
I'm gonna drive back to the study I have and see if I copy of my wife. We have this little study with my worldwide thing.
So based on what I'm hearing so far, right, a lot of people are catching up with somebody that you might have been away from over the term. And one thing you might pay attention to is what does that push-pull look like? How do you disclose and share parts of your life and things that you want to report to them? How do they do that? What does the ratio of that communication look like? How quickly do you settle into familiar ways of communicating with that person or ways you've talked to them in the past? Another thing to think about here is modality, right? As you're communicating through media, you might think about how some of the things we talked about with mediated communication and some of the theories that we'll get into today help to explain what's going on in that conversation, right? Face-to-face is very different from Skype, very different from a phone call in terms of content and how you're understanding each other.
Probably gonna talk to a friend back home, catch up. Probably just gonna talk to my dad about track.
Nice. All right.
I'm gonna talk to my boss at the farm workout about current issues and agriculture.
Awesome. Okay.
We're gonna talk about how this comes in.
What was that?
Talk about how this comes in.
Okay. Great.
I was gonna talk about.
And one thing to think about is you might think about social penetration theory and how well you know a friend or close person that you're catching up with, and to what degree you have things like shared dialogue, inside jokes, language, things that you just do with that person and communicate with that person that you wouldn't outside of that relationship. So you might think about the role of culture, of context, of self-disclosure, and to what degree you have comfort with self-disclosure involving that person.
I'm probably gonna talk to one of my brothers about basketball.
All right.
I'm gonna talk to my roommate about issues for women in firefighting.
Awesome.
I'm probably gonna talk to my grandma about how communications changed since she was my age.
Oh, yeah. All right.
I'll probably talk to my mom and one of my brothers just about.
Probably either talk to my roommate or my best friend.
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna talk to my roommate about building.
So, some of you are coming in with a fairly clear sense of what to talk about, but even within a broad topic, like talking about sports, talking about sort of the goings on of issues in firefighting, right? There might be just natural ways that conversation evolves, or you could be talking about something totally different. So I definitely encourage you to give that opportunity for your conversations to be flexible. And again, if you find that things are starting out a little bit awkward, pick that snippet of the conversation that really stands out to you. And remember, if there's not a lot of conversation or dialogue that's happening in what you're recording, you might pay attention to the nonverbal cues. To what degree are things like tone of voice, gesturing, and physicality playing a role? As we talked about, nonverbal communication is such a large part of how we communicate that there is a lot that you can cover just on that basis. So I definitely encourage you to really get that conversation going, ideally over this longer weekend. Do let me know if you're running into issues with completing this assignment, and I'm happy to look over a draft or outline. So last class, we took some time to talk about computer-mediated communication. Again, our communication is mediated, like in a conflict, it's somebody who's overseeing and moderating what's happening. We talked about this idea of the medium being the message. How a message is communicated is incredibly important to understanding the message itself. And communication through media play really big roles in shaping our identity. Our ability to disclose and share elements of ourselves happens in large part due to online disclosure. One last update I wanted to give you is that the attendance should be current up through Monday's class. So I do recommend looking through that. And if you see anything in error, just let me know. Remember that everybody gets 3 missing classes, and past that, I am asking you to complete the makeup assignments for days that you. Today, we'll be talking about a bit more of elements of media and ways that media shape identity, especially as we consider some of the challenges in psychosocial development and the ways that media have altered the landscape of ways we communicate. One thing people brought up is self-presentation and the idea that people don't necessarily communicate in ways that are necessarily honest and reflect their interaction face to face. And then lastly, we'll be talking about a few different theories, doing a group activity where I ask you to split off and explore some theories related to media and communication. Let's quickly recap here. Last class, we talked about this idea of identity of both a front and backstage self, and of the idea that we use communication through media as a way of managing our impression. If you're walking down a hall or if you're in a classroom, right, in many ways, we are very visible through our clothing, through our mannerisms, through our conversation. No matter what we do, there's elements of our body, our physicality, and our ways of communicating that we can't really hide or conceal. And so in many ways, our ability online to alter and change the ways that we communicate. For instance, we might use a filter, we might use a photo that only shows a part of ourselves. We might curate a profile, description, photo, content, right, that presents a version of ourselves that we want others to see. There's a good chance if you use social media and you're thinking about a photo to upload, that you've probably gone through a number of different photos to decide which to use. So our ability to moderate how we present ourselves online is a really important element. And Erving Goffman, who writes a lot about identity, has discussed this in terms of a front stage and backstage self. The front stage self being what other people see, what's visible, what's known. The backstage self being kind of what's hidden and outside of that process. We might even think back to the Johari window last week as an example of how we have this open self, this hidden self that we're concealing and not sharing with other people, or we might choose to share depending on the communities or groups that we find ourselves a part of. For instance, many people find that disclosing and sharing in online communities or groups that align with their interests or beliefs is a lot more straightforward to do than doing so in person. So I want to talk next about Erik Erikson's model of psychosocial development. I'll be showing a video that goes into these different stages of development in a little bit more detail. And while understanding human development is important from a psychology perspective, the reason why we care in this context is that media increasingly, right, we now have babies that are holding iPads, right? These stages have been generationally and overall implicated by the role of technology. So we want to think about what role media has played in our ability to essentially navigate these different crises and questions that are at different stages of development. And as we see over time, right, we as humans humans are motivated by different questions that are guiding our sense of identity and sense of self over time. So I wanted to share a clip that goes into those stages of development in a bit more detail.
Newton's theory of psychosocial development identifies 8 stages which a healthy individual should pass through from birth to death. At each stage, we encounter different needs, ask new questions, and meet people who influence our behavior and learning. Stage 1, basic trust versus mistrust. As infants, we ask ourselves if we can trust the world, and we wonder if it's safe. We learn that if we can trust someone now, we can also trust others in the future. If we experience fear, we develop doubt and mistrust. The key to our development is our mother. Stage 2, autonomy versus shame and doubt. In our early childhood, we experience ourselves and discover our body. We ask, is it okay to be me? If we are allowed to discover ourselves, then we develop self-confidence. If we are not, we can develop shame and self-doubt. Both parents now play a major role. Stage 3, initiative versus guilt. In preschool, we take initiative, try out new things, and learn basic principles like how round things roll. We ask, is it okay for me to do what I do? If we are encouraged, we can follow our interests. If we are held back or told that what we do is silly, we can develop guilt. We are now learning from the entire family. Stage 4, industry versus inferiority. Now we discover our own interests and realize that we are different from others. We want to show that we can do things right. We ask if we can make it in this world. If we receive recognition from our teachers or peers, we become industrious, which is another word for hard working. If we get too much negative feedback, we start to feel inferior and lose motivation. Our neighbors and schools now influence us the most. Stage 5, identity versus role confusion. During adolescence, we learn that we have different social roles. We are friends, students, children, and citizens. Many experience an identity crisis. If our parents now allow us to go out and explore, we can find identity. If they push us to conform to their views, we can face role confusion and feel lost. Key to our
Stage is particularly impacted by the role of online communication and online identity presence.
learning are our peers and role models. Stage 6, intimacy versus isolation. As young adults, we slowly understand who we are, and we start to let go of the relationships we had built earlier in order to fit in. We ask ourselves if we can love. If we can make a long-term commitment, we are confident and happy. If we cannot form intimate relationships, we might end up feeling isolated and lonely. Our friends and partners are now central to our development. Stage 7, generativity versus stagnation. When we reach our 40s, we become comfortable, use our leisure time creatively, and maybe begin contributing to society. Our concern is generativity. If we think that we are able to lead the next generation into this world, we are happy. If we did not resolve some conflicts earlier, we can become pessimistic and experience stagnation. People at home and at work are now who influences the most. Stage 8, ego integrity versus despair. As we grow older, we tend to slow down and begin to look back over our lives. We ask, how have I done? If we think we did well, we develop feelings of contentment and integrity. If not, we can experience despair and become grumpy and bitter. Time to compare us with mankind. Eric.
So I think that this provides some good ways of visualizing and giving some examples of these different stages of development. And for many of us, right, we grew up at a time where technology and the evolution of technology only really became a thing at some of the stages, right? So for instance, we might find that in these kinds of stages, we found social media really taking off and being incorporated into our lives. And obviously, we know that that has been really different, that technology has been incorporated from a very young age, right? We can think about how the use of games, of tablets, of education software, right, might shape some of those early stages of development. We know that a lot of social media has been incredibly popular among middle schoolers, preteens, and early teens. My sister's a middle school teacher, and there was a TikTok trend where students were trashing their bathrooms at the school, and that was just like a trend that middle schoolers were doing. So not great, but an example of how our interactions with media are shaping our behavior. How can they be good? What's considered to be good or acceptable behavior, right? That's something that we oftentimes will look to online. Especially, as mentioned, this stage at adolescence of trying to figure out a sense of identity and cultivate that sense of identity. Oftentimes, right, online and mediated communities are ways that identity develops. People use outlets such as Discord, they use forums, they use algorithms from apps like TikTok, right, and social media to relate to other people. We also have the idea of a parasocial relationship, which refers to a one-sided relationship in which somebody perhaps has a celebrity or influencer or figure that's important to them that doesn't know who they are, but they feel a connection to that person, right? And then when we look to fulfilling our needs, such as loving and belonging, feeling like we're able to develop as humans in our social relationships, that's something that kind of at this 18 to 40 age that many of us are continuing to grapple with, right? And questioning to what extent online avenues can provide our ability to form those connections. And again, we think back to the past 2.5 years with COVID, and we see that there are limitations in technology's ability to fill in some of those gaps, but also opportunities, as we talked about in our discussion on Monday. This relates to the idea of online identity presentation. As we talked about with uncertainty reduction theory, the idea of catfishing or presenting a false version of yourself online is a pervasive practice. Somebody might not be who they say they are, or they might be a bot trying to gain personal information. An anonymous identity is one that lacks any sort of traceable information. And sometimes that anonymous identity can be completely incorrect, right? So it's gained a lot of criticism over the years, but completely anonymous forums or settings like 4chan are examples of completely anonymous communication. People don't have to have a username, they don't have to have any identifiable information, so it can be completely anonymous. Pseudonyms, right? So a pseudonym you can think about as a type of brand or a stage name that's given to somebody, right, who is a distortion or a different version of that person, although there might be some similarities in terms of how that person is in real life versus how they present online. Oftentimes, it's an exaggerated version of themselves that they use in those types of settings, right? So you might think, for instance, about the use of stage names for musicians and other performers, right? A really good example is somebody like Lady Gaga, right? Who is a very kind of exaggerated performance that is a bit of a distortion from how she might behave day to day. And then a real life identity, right, is an accurate reflection of who you are in an online context or mediated context. And we oftentimes see this when it comes to close family members, friends, and people that we talk to with whom we understand and know their identity. So I wanted to take a somewhat different approach here in terms of examining these 4 major theories in communication. So we have a few different theories that help us to understand some of the ways that communication is occurring in mediated settings. And each of those theories carry different assumptions about what the role of technology plays in the ways that we communicate. These 4 theories are uses and gratification, social presence, media richness, and social information processing theory, or SIP. And if you have not taken a stab at this week's reading yet, I do want to show you where you'll be able to access this. So if you go to the link to the textbook for today, starting on page 432 or page 27 out of the PDF, you'll notice these 4 different theories being discussed and talked about a little bit. And so for those of you that have a device or have access to getting to the readings, I do recommend taking some time to look through your assigned theory. If you do not have a device with you, you're welcome to look over the shoulder of somebody who does within your group, or take some time to chat about some of the things that your group is noticing with regard to your selected theory. So what I'd like each group to do for your attendance today is to take a look at your assigned theory, right, and ask yourself, what is this theory in your own group's words? So rather than trying to do a word for word transfer of that theory, how might you explain this theory to a grandparent or to a student who is not in this class, right? So think about how you would explain what this theory is. Think about how this theory explains the ways that people share their identity online. We've been talking a bit about how identity is shaped online through online interactions. How does this theory approach the idea of identity? And what influence does media have over people's lives according to this theory, right? Theories on media run the gamut. Some people think that media has total control over our lives and completely dictates the ways that we think about issues. Other people on the other extreme say that media has virtually no or very little role, and that our own agency plays a much bigger factor. So be thinking about what this theory says about media and media's role in our lives. So it looks like. Okay, so we will do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 on uses and gratification. We'll do 1, 2, 3, and 4 on social presence. We'll do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 on media richness. We'll do 1, 2, 3, and 4 on social information processing theory. So take some time to move over to your groups. Take some time to look over this theory, including ways that it's discussed in this reading. You might also do some searching online on this theory, and take some time to discuss and be prepared to share your perspective on these questions as a group.
Like the problem thing about like, it doesn't mean it having people's house according to the. We don't want them to house.
So you might transition into discussing some of the ways that this theory is shaping people's lives. I'll give you a few more minutes to talk about and prepare for some things to share to the group. Okay, take a couple more minutes to finish up, and then I'm going to ask each group to share. Are there any groups who would like some more time? Another minute. All right. Let's go ahead and talk about these theories a bit together. Again, you can think about a theory as a broad way of understanding the world or of understanding how we communicate. So let's have each group share what this theory is and what you all felt in terms of identity and role of media in this theory. So let's start here with uses and gratifications.
Okay, so gratification theory is when people use like mass media for their own happiness. So like if they get something out of it, pass time to people like that.
Mhm.
And then how do we explain how we can develop engineering community? They said that if you enjoy the internet more, you'll spend more time on it, post more, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And then what influence does over other people's lives? We said people who use this theory are often less satisfied with life and more anxious in face-to-face interactions. But that was a study that was done in the 2000s. So things would be still different now.
Yeah. Great. So uses and gratification is kind of on one extreme, right? It says that media's control over our lives is not a big deal, but instead that the opposite is true, that we have a lot of control over media that we choose in our own lives. Good way of thinking about UNG is to think about if you use streaming. You go on Netflix or you go on Hulu, and you have so many options of things that you'd like to watch, right? The ability to make so many choices about how we use media, and indeed the streaming wars are an example of how uses and gratifications theory is at play. We get to choose what we want to watch and what we want to subscribe to based on content that we find ourselves interested in, right? Netflix has lost a lot of support and funding because people are not as interested in its content. So uses and gratifications theory says we've got a lot of power and influence in how we're choosing and using media in our lives. How about social presence theory?
About how social is being able to acknowledge and recognize that you're impacted with people through technology.
Mhm.
We talked about how that can be more hesitant or open,
Mhm.
about sharing your identity and certain things.
Mhm.
We also talked about how it might limit in-person interaction because technology talking to people online.
This theory is useful when we define what presence is. How present is somebody online? One spectrum is being on Zoom and being muted and having video off and like doing laundry while you're in a meeting. The other extreme would be to be incredibly involved and active through something virtually. We think about games that are online as well, again, like Final Fantasy 14, World of Warcraft, Among Us, etc. Right? A lot of these online games that involve things like audio and participation online show us this example of online presence as well. Dr. Tony Anderson in communication teaches a lot of courses related to social presence online, using things like Second Life online, which is really cool, and understanding how identity develops online. About media richness.
We said that this theory means that a message is richer through the amount of information that is presented, as well as the way the information is being presented,
Mhm.
and that face-to-face communication is the richest form of a message because it can read the social cues.
Mhm.
And then it affects the way people share their identities online by how much information they disclose of themselves. They can choose to be super rich with the message or not disclose as much information. And then the influence it has on people's lives, people may get caught up in like over explaining their life with a super rich, like unneeded message, or the other side with the like not a rich message and not giving up much.
So media richness theory, right, is very much about to what degree might media engage us. On one extreme, you have something like email that is very stilted, it's asynchronous, it oftentimes has formality and guidelines. The other end, you have very like a meaningful phone call or Zoom call or something similar. Part of why apps like TikTok have gained a lot of popularity, or Snapchat, is because they're richer. They don't just involve sending a message or sharing a post. They involve the use of video, the use of audio, and this active engagement. So you have richer, more engaged media that has people more interested and more able to follow along to the message and the key ideas that the message is saying, right? So you can think about media richness theory as media running spectrums between either very disengaged, not very rich, to very, very engaged. And that impacts how comfortable we are sharing our identity, expressing ourselves, and to what extent we can express ourselves online. And how about social information processing?
Communication, and it talks about how this information argues that over time relationships form into communication and then with developing like relationships that are developed face to face. He did state that it will take more time to develop, but the interactions with them will change over time and will begin the relationship will begin to evolve. It will just take more time to develop face to face.
Yeah. So social information processing comes from Joseph Walther. And Walther's argument, as we're hitting on, is that online communication or mediated communication has the potential to be closer or more intense than face-to-face communication. It's a bit of a hot take, but part of this argument is this idea of hyper-personal communication. that if you're actively texting or messaging somebody, or you're actively engaged with somebody online, you have the potential to disclose and share more, to develop a relationship in a deeper way, right? You're not regulated by how often you can see somebody face to face. If you're constantly messaging or catching up with that person online, there is the ability to develop a relationship and also to use certain types of technology, right? If you're in something like a guild, growing up, if you were like me and you played Neopets as a kid, right, that was a way to develop really close relationships and friends online. That's part of the argument that social information processing theories make. This week's Canvas prompt is asking you to look at a couple of these theories. Doing some additional research into these theories and understanding these is a good idea as you're gearing up for the final exam, and also will help you as you're thinking about the role that media has in our lives. So to wrap up for today, we talked about identity and online interactions, how we manage our impressions differently, and also how our process of social development is impacted through our online participation as well. And we've talked about some of these theories for online participation. Remember that we do not meet on Friday because of Labor Day, so enjoy the long weekends. Next Monday, we'll be looking at relationships and the role of relationships in communication. So please pass forward or email me your group's work if you haven't done so already. Have a great long weekend, and I'll see you next Monday.
Or Friday.